one of the first things I like to do when we come into a room is ask you to raise your hand if you are a veteran of the United States military. And this part just about always makes me cry. I'm going to try not to. But I want to tell you thank you from the bottom of my heart. Every single one of you for what you've given me, for what you were willing to sacrifice for me, for what you were that caused my son to be what he was. You know, Aaron was raised in the 80s. We raised him in the time when America was strong. We raised him during the Reagan era. And you can have policy differences with Reagan if you want to, but the truth is Reagan knew how to make America look ferocious. Like the leader on the block, like the ones who didn't take no for an answer, like the ones who didn't negotiate with terrorists, the one who said in his debate, you trusted the Russians? I mean, you know, we had power in America, and we certainly were, in those years, proud to be an American. That's the era that Aaron Vaughn grew up in. He was 6 years old when Ronald Reagan spoke those infamous words, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. You know, he used to sit at his father's feet. My husband is one of those people who can just rattle off information about history and tie all the players together across all the nations. And I remember Aaron, seriously, till the day he died, the last time he was home, he was asking his father stories about military strategies, about ways that, you know, other wars were fought. He was consumed with America's great and noble history. And before I go any further, I want to tell you that the most important thing I can tell you about Aaron Vaughn is that he gave his life to Christ at a very young age. And because of that, he had a discernment that was very uncharacteristic of most young children. He was able to understand right from wrong, and more importantly, he was able to understand that there is evil in this world and that it must be confronted. From the time he was 8 years old, he would tell anybody who cared to ask that one day he was going to be a Navy SEAL. Now, he was the most unlikely person you would ever imagine, because he was a gangly, skinny kid that was really not coordinated and pretty funny to watch with a basketball or anything like that, but that's what he was going to do. And, you know, that dream continued, and he pursued that dream, and we were always reading stories about Navy SEALs and buying books about Navy SEALs. We were always reading up on the Spartans and the 300, all of those things. He was consumed with it. By the time Aaron was a senior in high school, he obliterated his ACL in his left knee during a high school football injury. And the doctors went in and repaired it. And his warrior spirit, he rehabbed, got back on track, was getting letters from colleges again, which that was his dream. He was going to play college football, and then he was going to go join the SEAL Challenge program. In the spring of that year, just before school got out, after all that time of rehab and getting well, he was in a pickup game of basketball outside and blew it out again. This time, when the doctors went in to repair it, they came out and told us a very tragic story. They said there was nothing we could do. His knee was too destroyed. There was nothing to attach a new ACL to. And that he would be incapacitated for the rest of his life, basically, you know. Anytime he needed to do anything athletic, basketball, anything he wanted to do, he'd have to wear a specially designed brace that would stabilize his knee because there was no joint. So, Aaron's dream of becoming a Navy SEAL, you know, disappeared. And I remember when he woke up from that anesthetic fog and we told him the news, I remember the disappointment on his face was almost more than a mother could bear, because he was very confused. Because when he knew he was inside, he knew he was a warrior. He knew what he'd been created to do. He'd always known it, and now this dream was over. But Aaron, because he was a warrior, he went on with life. He adjusted. He went to college, got a great degree, and landed an amazing job on a golf course, Jupiter Island Club in Hope Sound, Florida, one of the most prestigious golf courses in America. Had a wonderful job, and life was moving on. But when he was 20 years old, America experienced that day that none of us will ever forget, that Sean just talked about, that inspired so many young men to join the military, and that was September 11th, 2001. Now, I remember as we sat as a family that night and we kept watching those images over and over again of those towers falling, I kept looking at Aaron, and it really wasn't like the rest of us in the room. You know, all of us were devastated by the sights, but Aaron was angry. And the ferocious spirit in him just rose. And I remember the most incredible, impacting moment that he had was when we started hearing the stories about the people on Flight 93, those 40 Americans. just regular citizens who decided to take their place in history and do whatever was necessary, and they ended up saving our nation's capital. And when you started hearing those stories come out, and then especially when we heard Todd Beamer's famous cry, battle cry, let's roll, it changed my boy. And none of us knew exactly what was going on in his mind. But on his 21st birthday, not many months later, he came home. On his way home, and I like to tell people this just to make them real to you, Aaron's favorite food was fried Spam. So I had his favorite dinner of fried, disgusting Spam, you know, and Aaron was home a little late, and he came home and he sat down and he said, sit down, Mom, Dad, I got to tell you something. What's on? Okay. I stopped by the Naval Recruiting Office today and I joined the SEAL Challenge program. And I said, you know, we're very encouraging people, and we weren't going to try to make him feel bad or anything, but we're like, son, you can never make it. What are you doing? Did you tell him about your knee? And he said, well, of course not, because they wouldn't have let me in. They wouldn't have let me in if I did. And I'm like, okay, so you lied. Okay, that's good. Let's move with this. And he's like, you know, if God wants me to be a Navy SEAL, like I've always felt, He'll let me be a Navy SEAL. Make a long story short, Aaron went into Bud's class 248. 157 men started, 7 finished, and he was one of them.
Yes. Wow.
Not only was he one of them, his name is still in a place of high esteem in Coronado on a plaque called First Time Every Time. His name is engraved there as one of the few people in history who have completed every evolution that was required of them the first time they ever tried it. It was incredible. Aaron never took for granted that God had allowed him to fulfill his dream. He always, till the day he died, the last time we talked about how grateful he was that he'd been able to live this life. So he went into SEAL Team 1 on the West Coast, and he spent many years there. On his very first deployment, he met the love of his life, Kimberly, who was a Washington Redskins cheerleader. And I remember telling him all the time. They married 2 years later. And I remember saying all the time, man, you are going to have an amazing love story to tell your children one day. You know, you and their mother met on another continent, you know. And I used to just love that story. And he couldn't wait for that day till he could tell his kids about what he'd done as a Navy SEAL, about how he met their mother. All those things were so precious to him. One thing I haven't said on this tour that I'm going to say just because it's the last night, and I want to share a little more about him. My son had the capacity to love like few people I've known in life. And I will tell you that among all the things he loved, probably to a fault, he loved this country just about more than anything in his life. He loved his family. He loved his God. He loved this country. So moving forward, by 2010, Kimberly and Aaron had their first child, Reagan. He was a year old. They packed up everything, and they moved to the East Coast, where he would screen for development group, SEAL Team 6. And of course, everybody thought, all of us thought, you'll never make it into 6, they'll find your knee injury. Well, they did. They found the knee injury, and excuse me, little kids, but they said, well, hell, you've made it this far, keep going, you know. So he went straight through the screening in SEAL Team 6. And then on June 3rd, their second child came into the world, Chamberlain. 3 weeks later, Aaron would deploy for what would end up being his final. On the morning of August 6th, we got the phone call that completely changed our lives. There had been a helicopter shot down in the Tega River Valley of Afghanistan. And many of you may be familiar with it. It was the single largest loss of life in the history of this war. It wiped out an entire squadron of SEAL Team 6. It was the single largest loss of life in the history of naval special warfare. And unfortunately, my boy was part of it. But on that day, when Aaron's boots came off and his weapon was laid down, his father and I vowed to him that we would not allow this country he died for to be destroyed by a government who doesn't love it like we do. And we've been fighting for the last 2.5 years, yes, to change the rules of engagement on our battlefield, where our soldiers are constantly bound by rules that give all of the advantage to their enemy. And they're dying by the handfuls, by the droves, constantly, because of these rules of engagement. But what I want to talk about is not Aaron's death. I want to talk about his life. He had a tattoo on his arm. It said Mole on the Bay. It's the most famous battle cry in the history of warriors. It was the words that King Leonidas spoke to Xerxes, when Xerxes and the 600,000 Persians finally had Leonidas in his 300 cornered. And Xerxes had so much respect for Leonidas and those 300 and the damage they'd done against his armies that he shouted out to him, "Lay down your weapons and live." And Leonidas shouted back, "Mole on the Bay," which means come and take them. That's the spirit that the founders of this great nation had when they threw off the chains of tyranny. That's the spirit that my boy had when he said after 9/11, "Oh no, not on my watch. I'm going to take my place in history. I'm going to serve this country and I'm going to protect Americans' freedom." It's the spirit that all of you had when you signed that line and vowed your life and everything you had up until your death to go protect this nation. And it's certainly the spirit of the men and women of Concerned Veterans for America. In the last 2 years, we've been approached by many organizations to work alongside them. And I will tell you, I've not found one that I have been as excited about working alongside as Concerned Veterans for America. And there's one reason. Every other organization that I've been confronted with has not had a plan of action. And I think in America, if we want to restore this country, we have got to have a plan of action. Everywhere I go, everywhere I talk, people say, "Yeah, Karen, but what can we do?" Isn't that the question? I mean, we're watching all of our freedoms, all of our liberties be stripped from us, and we are standing here dumbfounded over what we're witnessing, but we don't know what to do about it. Well, Concerned Veterans for America has a plan. And it's very important that you go to that action table before the night is up and you sign up to work alongside us, because you are the heroes of this nation. You are the representation of the best America has to offer. And I just want to tell you, the sacrifice that Aaron made, that over 1 million others have made, is too valuable for us to toss it away and pretend like it costs nothing for America to be free. You know, Pete says all the time, he quotes the first part of the Ronald Reagan quote, and I love it, but my favorite line is the last. When he says that about freedom doesn't get passed through the bloodstream, the last line says, "Or one day, our children's children, we'll tell our children's children what it was once like in America when men were free." And I'll tell you what, the fearful thing is we're nearly there. One last thing before I quit. Just recently, I Googled the Declaration of Independence, and while we've all heard over and over again, you know, the main body of the Declaration of Independence, it had been decades since I'd read the arguments that our founders had against the British government. If you go back and you read those now, it will stun you. The parallel will stun you. And we're only 237 years old, and we've let it go right back to what all of those men sacrificed everything for. Because we're comfortable. We've got to get out of our comfort zone. We've got to understand that what Pete says all the time, if not us, who? And if not now, when? Because there's not going to be much more time. So I ask you to honor the sacrifice. I ask you who have served and have sacrificed to strap up your boots one more time. I ask you to join us to lock arms with me, because, you know, Aaron's gone. I can't lock arms with him ever again. But there's not a body of people in this entire world that I would rather lock arms with than an American soldier. I'm asking you to join me, and I'm thanking you for letting me speak here tonight.